Not somebody to help me plug in the computer. If you looked at your bulletins, you will notice that she's going to actually share a little bit. But I just want to catch you up very briefly this week. And I want to thank you for the privilege of going as a missionary from this church to Cape Town, South Africa. By the way, I was born and raised there. So in a sense, it's going back home. But it's the first opportunity I have to go and share for camp meeting. So I'm real excited about it, to go back there. This week was an interesting week because we had been planning on this trip, this mission trip. But different things happened this week, some of which I will share later on. We didn't have a European representative up here, but I so wish that Kay Fagley were here. She would have been a perfect European representative from Finland. But we thank God that the news we were getting, she is getting better. The last time I had a chance to visit her, we're hoping to see her today before I head out. And she would have been the European representative. But through her son, you saw Martin up here today. So kind of retroactively, we had a European representative. But it would have been great if Kay would be with us. And I thank you for continuing to pray for her and to visit her. And we had a chance to see her, how she's doing. And then Monday got to see Ruby in the hospital. And the reason I'm giving you a quick overview is because this week suddenly we had to make an emergency trip. Some of you already know, a friend of mine I mentioned a few weeks ago, he was not doing well. We found out that his cancer is terminal, and he had passed the 2-week mark of survival. And we were aware that he may not make it until I get back from the trip to South Africa. So Linda and I jumped in the car, drove up to Canada to visit him. He lives in Victoria Island. And had a good visit with him this week. We praise God. He's at peace, praising the Lord, and thankful for God's grace. This is a picture of him. Now, incidentally, on the guys at the top, if you can turn these stage lights down, I was just told by somebody this last week that when the stage lights are down, you can see much better. And so we're going to do that and see if that works. We'll keep these lights on, so if you need to take a few notes. Today there are 3 or 4 Bible verses. It's a personal testimony we're going to share, but there are 3 or 4 Bible verses we want to share. I mentioned that 2 weeks ago, while Big Lake Camp was going on, I told the story of, the sermon was called, "Do It Again, Dad, Do It Again." And remember the story. Who was here? Remember that story of David and Bernie flying in an airplane, and the plane went down a couple hundred yards? Let me see the hands. Anybody here? That's you were here. The pilot of the plane is this gentleman here. This was the pilot who is now in his 70s. And he's the one who is suffering from terminal cancer. And doctors don't know. In fact, he says, doctor said I could go to sleep tonight and not wake up tomorrow morning. And so Linda and I came back yesterday morning from Canada, got back just before sunset last evening, had a wonderful visit with Bernie, and this is his family, his wife sitting right next to him, friends, daughters. I didn't get a picture of the son, David, the one about whom we told this story, but David was there as well, and so we had a wonderful visit. We were there about 36 hours at their home, visiting with them in Victoria Island. By the way, one of these moments are one of what we call a bittersweet moment. It's wonderful to see family and friends. It's good to see their love for the Lord. It's wonderful to see a friend who loves Jesus, who is at peace. But it's a bittersweet because we had to go and say our final farewell, but not our final farewell. Because as we talked with Bernie, in fact, we left, I said, Bernie, we'll see you in the morning. The great resurrection morning. So we left there with our hearts filled with hope. We're thankful to God for his blessings. The message today, delivered from death, a marathon of miracles. And so we're going to take you with us into a journey. But I want you to understand the journey that we're taking you on. It's a story, a personal story of my wife and me, primarily what happened to me and how God blessed. And Linda is part of the story. But before we go further, I want to make sure you understand the context. This is Mark chapter 5, verse 19. One of 3 or 4 verses I'm going to suggest. If you want to write it down in your bulletins, write this verse down so you can go back, reflect on this. Just 3 or 4 verses. There's no study sheet because it's a testimony time. So there's no study guide. Oh, some people have come and said, thank you for the study guide. And what I'm wanting to hear, if this was helpful, we'd like to do that on a more regular basis. But this is one of the things we begun last week. But this verse is very important. You can read it from your New International Version in the pew, or if you want to, you can read it with me. The story, of course, is about Jesus who met the two men who were demon-possessed. And here's the focus on the one man in Mark chapter 5. And this man fell in love with Jesus, and he wanted to go with Jesus wherever he went. And notice, however, Jesus did not permit him, but said to him, maybe you want to read with me. Are you ready? Let's read together. Go home to your friends and tell them what great things the Lord has done for you and how he has had compassion on you. This is the framework in which we're telling the story, delivered from death only by God's grace, that I am here today. Well, of course, when you think of Africa, where we went to Zimbabwe, one of the first things you think of are animals. Here's a rhino that we saw there in one of the game parks. Now, we went to be missionaries in this place called Salem University, where Donna Worley, who was up here, and Richard and their family also served. And we were blessed to be at Salem University.
Bernie also was there.
Oh, that's right. Bernie also was there. The gentleman who's dying, he was a missionary to that same place. We, of course, were there to serve the students. These were some of our religion theology majors studying to be pastors with their families. Linda and I would go to the churches around the main campus. There were a dozen churches that they called bush churches, little companies that were started, and we would go around on Sabbath. That was me preaching through a translator, and this is Linda here with some of the ladies at one of these churches. Now, the churches were not as fancy as ours. This is a church, folks. Notice the ceiling, made out of grass, and they have what you can call natural air conditioning there. Plus, if you fall asleep in church, you wake up with the rain. So there's and this is one of the churches that actually had a building, obviously. We lived on a farm about 12 miles from the campus. Farm belonged to the university. And this is us eating outside one day. And you'll notice the tree. I want to pause a moment. You see this big tree here? It's stretched about 50 feet up. Syringa tree. And notice the tree was right above my driveway. Very important factor. This is the concrete driveway. And here's another picture of that same tree taken from the back of the house. This, again, notice our house also had grass roof, but a little nicer done than the other roof you saw. And this is the tree we're going to tell you a story about. And the reason I'm sharing the story to you is because the story really starts on April 5, 1998. And I put the date up there intentionally because April 5, 1998 was the day I was climbing. I climbed up a ladder fixed to stand firmly on the concrete driveway. The reason the ladder was firm was because the gardener, who had acrophobia. What does that mean? Afraid of heights, correct. Our gardener would not climb the ladder. So he held the ladder while I climbed the ladder. Got to the top of the ladder, and I was climbing into that tree to trim it, to take some branches out because the branches were falling onto cars. There was the danger on the driveway. And I grabbed one of the branches to pull myself into the tree from the top of the ladder, 15, 20 feet up. And I pulled, and the branch crumpled in my hand like paper. And instantly I found myself falling backwards, and I realized that's going to be a hard landing. 15 to 20 feet to the concrete driveway. Miraculously, God intervened, and I landed actually on all fours. I don't know how I did it. No, I'm not a cat. The cat knows how to take the pressure. But when I grabbed that branch later on, it made me think of this verse. There is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end, it leads to what? To death. That branch seemed fine to me. Proverbs 16 verse 25 seemed like nothing wrong. Seemed like a good branch. And when I grabbed it and pulled, it was nothing. It was like paper. The tree, by the way, I didn't know until later on, was rotting from the inside. And eventually the tree did collapse. But I landed pretty hard, to say the least. A friend of mine who's a physical therapist was in touch with us constantly, and she was the one who typed this up. This is the actual typed up sheet of the notes she took. These are my injuries, which they discovered when I was rushed to the hospital. Both wrists crushed and displaced. Right one compound, meaning open. By the way, I could see the bone when I hit the concrete. I saw the bone sticking out there. Right ankle crushed and severely displaced. Heel split open. Compression fracture of 3 vertebrae, T4, T7, T12, 12 is worse. Number 4, loose piece of bone at T12. There is concern about this fragment as it has potential to do some damage to the spinal cord, but so far it is not. Number 5, cracked sternum. The last 5 words are like. There's always good news somewhere. There was no head injury. But of course, I had multiple broken bones. Now, Linda wasn't there. The reason I was trimming the tree and getting everything ready, sprucing it up, because she had come back to the United States for a family emergency. And I knew she was coming home, and I wanted, like a decent, good husband, men listening, getting the house all ready for her. So she wasn't even there when I fell. And this was the day before her birthday, actually. And so I was like, get it ready. And then when I had the accident, I said to my parents, don't bother to call her. I'll be fine. I didn't know about this. I didn't know about the internal injuries. I didn't realize how seriously I was injured. Needless to say, they rushed me to the hospital. I was put in casts on both arms, a cast on my leg. Unfortunately, the doctor who treated me, not a Zimbabwean, he was an expat coming from another country in Africa. He was an orthopedic surgeon who had been fired from another institution for malpractice. So you know where the story is going, right? So things went from bad to worse. As some people say, it's not the injury, it was the treatment. In my case, it was. He put the cast on my right leg so tight he severed the nerve on this leg. Okay? And then when he put the cast on both my wrists, no surgery, no straightening of the bones, simply the way the wrists were crooked, he just covered them up. And observed me for about 4 days and realized I was dying and sent me home to die. And I'm not joking. Here's the next picture. This was me at home on Friday night. This is me at home on Friday night because slowly I was dying. If you know, and I didn't know this, I learned I'm not a medical doctor. By the way, Linda's nephew's got a good joke. He was introducing me to one of his 9-year-old friends some years ago, and he says, my uncle's a doctor, but he's not the kind that helps people. So, yes, but medical people, they know what this is all about. We've got doctors, dentists, nurses, and so forth, physical therapists. What happens if you have too many broken bones or major broken bones and they are not reset? The bone marrow, or marrow, depends on your pronunciation, seeps out, goes through a chemical change, and then eventually it ends up in the lungs.
Blood clots.
Or blood clots. And you begin to drown, technically in simple terms, you begin to drown in your own bone marrow. Your lungs fill up with fluid. And so I ended up with ARDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome. And you last for 12 to 36 hours according to the medical textbook I went and read later on. But you notice the doctor had covered me up and I looked good. I looked fine. They sent me home with these casts and I looked fine. But guess what? Inside, things were happening, which makes me think of this verse, Proverbs 28, verse 13, our third verse for today. He who covers his sins will not prosper, but whoever, what? Confesses and forsakes them will have mercy. And so this is the lesson through this. I said, wow. And so while I was lying in bed, I was going from bad to worse. Now that was on Thursday. He sent me home to die. Friday, I was at home dying. Saturday night, things got so bad, they called an ambulance, which took 3 hours to get us to the hospital. And it wasn't really an ambulance. It was a glorified taxi, basically. And of course, I had a back problem, so they put me on a backboard and then a stretcher or whatever and rushed me to the hospital. When I got there, I was already blue in the face. They rushed me to the next hospital at 2 o'clock on a Sunday morning, a week after I had the accident. But thankfully, I praise God, the folk at Salem University in that church you saw at the beginning, they were praying. And so the testimony today is of God's grace and thankfully God's answer of yes. God sometimes says yes, or somebody says God, somebody says go. Sometimes God says no, sometimes God says slow. You know the 3 answers you get, right? So this time I'm thankful that the prayers were answered in a positive way. But here's a picture of me lying in the hospital. Because I had been oxygen deprived, because my lungs had been filling up with fluid. And for medical people and those interested, when you go to the hospital, you'll always notice the monitors nowadays and you look at them. Normal blood oxygen level is what? 95 to 100? Is that about right? Yes. It goes down to 80%, you get worried. You go down to 60% blood oxygen level, they call the family in to say their final farewells. Well, my blood oxygen level wasn't 40, wasn't 60, wasn't 50, wasn't 40, wasn't 30. It wasn't even 20%. it was 18%. That's why I call this a marathon of miracles, multiple miracles God performed. And of course, that would mean that I could end up brain dead, or the normal term, a vegetable. And in the meantime, Linda had been contacted, and so here she's going to pick up the story, because at this point in time where I am now lying in bed, half dead, Linda hears about it, and she is in the United States.
And listen up again, gentlemen, because I knew something was wrong, because it was my birthday, and he hadn't called, and he's very, very good about all those special dates that we like to, be addressed or do something. But I'm going to back up just a little bit. I grew up reading mission stories about Seleuci and all the countries. From a little girl, I wanted to go to Africa as a missionary. Well, we were at Southern. Ron had already, he was from Africa, so I'm from Texas, but we, different country anyway. Ron wasn't that eager to go, I'll just say that. I was dying to go because I'd never been. So anyway, we prayed about it. We worked it all out, except at the last thing was like, okay, well, we just had bought a house down in Collegedale, and so we're like, okay, Lord, you're going to have to work this out. It wasn't hardly even 2 days. We get a call out of the blue. We hadn't even discussed the price of selling our house, no sign, nothing. We get a call from a new faculty member, said, we heard you may be going to Africa. Can we come and look at your house? And I said, oh, we don't even know how much to ask. We haven't done anything. He said, that's okay. Long story short, they bought the house. So I was like, wow, Lord, just one more miracle and another way of affirming that we were supposed to go. So, of course, I'm waiting the week, waiting for him to contact me because it's my birthday, etc. And I knew something was wrong, but I could not get a hold of anyone at Seleuci. So I'd stay up until 2 in the morning. I'd call at all different hours because it wasn't that uncommon to have no telephone connection, even for a month at a time. So I would call the university, the school. Anyway, finally I got on the phone about, I think it was a week later, and somebody said, oh, long silence. I'll transfer you to someone who can tell you all about your husband. So, of course, things just went from there. It was a horrible time. I learned he had had this accident. The people that I had talked to thought he was doing okay, but turns out he was not because he had developed this ARDS. So for me, I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. And how did I handle this? This is what people want to know. I'll just have to tell you, it wasn't that good. I mean, it was very hard because here we had sold our house. All these things that the way the Lord had taught, had affirmed me that we were supposed to go. And then I find out he's dying. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense, Lord. Why? I said, well, I don't really want to go back there by myself. Anyway, long story short, my family lives near the General Conference, went to the airport there, and needless to say, it was the longest flight of my life because we had a 12-hour layover in Amsterdam. But the General Conference people had actually stepped in, and I had a flight, but they had also arranged for me to be in the business class. So, that was really nice because I was crying, and they were being very supportive and, saying, you can talk about it and tell us what's going on. They served me these orange juice little goblets, and I kept thinking, wow, Lord, I know you promised to be with me wherever you go. I just didn't realize that you go business class. And so I was, repeating scripture and scripture songs to try to keep my mind focused and saying the promises that God helped me, he would help me through all this, traumatic time. And the airlines was very good about, seeing to all my needs. They kind of put me in a corner so that everybody didn't see me weeping. But anyway, it was a very difficult time. But I really had to do a lot of rethinking about, why. And I didn't think it was a problem to ask why. At the same time, I didn't want to think of those negative things. I was saying, Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, and he leads me beside still waters and through death, etc. But I decided I'm going to go back to like Joshua 1:9, which is a song I learned, be strong and of good courage, fear not, nor be afraid of them, for the Lord thy God will be with you wherever you go.
I've got it on the screen. In fact, when Linda arrived, she wrote that very verse out on this very card. And just in case I would become conscious, they kept me heavily sedated. In fact, they told her, this is the language they use in Zimbabwe, your husband is paralyzed. She said, what? He's paralyzed? No, we've paralyzed him. You what? You paralyzed him? Heavily sedated is what they meant. And I was heavily sedated because they had intubated me, and I was, of course, trying to pull the tubes out, as you know what happens, because it's not very comfortable. And then they tied my wrists down, and I was out of it. And so when Linda arrived, she put this next to my bedside in case I came to while she wasn't there, because she couldn't stay 24/7. So that's the very verse she put there, and I'm thankful to have a godly wife. The first words Linda wanted me to see are not her words. Ron, and then she quotes God. Be strong and of good courage. Always focusing on Jesus rather than on ourselves. At the end, she says, I'm praying for you and the doctors and nurses. And of course, when I came to, they told Linda, your husband has come to.
I'm just going to back up a little bit, because while I was still in the States, I was able to get in touch with his doctor. It was a lady, and she said, well, now that you've asked, I'm not sure your husband will be alive by the time you get here. And so that's why I didn't think to tell you all of those, the trauma that it was for me, because I didn't know if he would be alive when I got there.
So she comes into the bedroom, and I see her coming in just that day. And by the way, so I'm looking at her, and she's waiting to hear 3 words. You guys know what those words are? I heard it. Only of She's waiting for those 3 words. So I could barely talk.
Right, and when I got there, he was still intubated, and I didn't even know if he could hear me, but I talked as though he understood me and everything. So I was waiting for those 3 words, because they were going to take it out, the tubes out, and then to see if he could function on his own.
So the first 3 words, I started correctly. I need water.
Like,
close. Thank you, Clyde. Clyde's right. It was close, but not close enough. The thing is, this is Africa. You got to understand, and they had not kept me hydrated. I was desperately thirsty.
And yellow.
I was
yellow.
So the first 3 words were, I need water. Then I could talk with her. But anyway, so, and then there's a spiritual lesson, obviously. Who is the water of life? Jesus is. But they weren't able to treat me at this better hospital as much as they could. They didn't have the right equipment, so they hired a jet, an air ambulance, and they packed me up, and they were now flying me to Switzerland. So we're hurrying on now quickly to Switzerland. There's a lot of the story more. One day we're going to write a book. It'll be about 100 or 200 pages. But got to Switzerland, and as they were wheeling me in. By the way, I'm on that, what they call the thing? Gurney, yeah. I'm on the gurney, and Linda's taking pictures.
None of my family was there, so I figured nobody else is going to know really what happened unless they take pictures.
Yeah, if you see her with a camera, you understand. She loves taking pictures, and she saw this one. Now, if there were any Germans here, I didn't think it was funny. I had studied German in school, and she said, this is funny. They're taking my husband into the what? The husband who fell off a tree into the what? Into the Not Fall Station, you're right. But if you know German or Germanic languages, I didn't think it was funny, because in my second language, which I'll have to practice when on Monday, Tuesday, Notfallstation is an emergency station or ward. But so she took that picture. I just had to throw that in. She's able to find humor in all kinds of things, and I'm glad for that. This is the emergency station. Our next picture is one of the smaller miracles. We got to Switzerland, one of the more expensive countries in the world. We were in Zimbabwe. Our local pay was the local pay of the locals there. And 1 week's pay was going to pay for 1 night in a hotel in Switzerland. And so the guy in charge, the main orthopedic surgeon, actually at that time he was classified as the top orthopedic surgeon in the world. And I jokingly say, I went from the worst in Zimbabwe to the best in Zurich. And so this doctor turned to one of the nurses, Nadia, and said something to her quickly, and she ran off to check, because this was a training hospital because of the top orthopedic surgeon in the world. And she came back, she said, yes, there's a room. And so they gave Linda a nurse in training room for $5 a night instead of $55.
For 6 weeks.
Yes, she was able to stay there. 37 days we were there, and while we were there, $5 a night, because she was a nurse in training, They didn't have her work. She was in nursing training on vacation, you know what I mean? She had no work to do, but they allowed her 24/7 access to my bedside. Whenever she wanted to, she can come. After they put us through major screening, because we came from Africa, they were afraid we'd brought certain bugs.
And he had just gotten malaria, too,
Oh,
because in the hospital, they hadn't continued his malarial medication, and so he did come down with malaria.
And I arrived in Switzerland with malaria to boot. So it was an exciting time in our lives, nonetheless. 25 days after the accident, April 30 was the day they decided to do the operation, because they had to first recover my lungs in Africa, fly me to Europe, and then wait for the doctor to be there. And there were 3 doctors who worked on me, medical superintendent, another doctor, and the orthopedic surgeon. So that's 25 days after the accident. So guess what they had to do? You were exactly right. They had to take all my bones and pull them apart, break the bones, and then reconstruct. For those of us who were kids, we learned a little ditty, Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. You know that one? Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. And in this case, the king's men were able to put Humpty together again. But April, that was a 6-hour operation. For those of you who don't quite enjoy seeing things such as, x-rays and maybe blood, this is the x-ray of my right foot. The metal is still there. Everything except this one recalcitrant screw. One day I was running a 5K, a 3.1-mile race, and as I was running the race, this screw began to unscrew itself. You see it right there? And I was running, and I heard, I said, mechanical failure. And that was on Sunday. Really, that was on Sunday. And Tuesday, 2 days later, I went to the orthopedic surgeon, but this time I choose him carefully. This orthopedic surgeon is a marathon runner. Every year he comes to San Francisco from Michigan to run a marathon. So I went to this doctor and I said to him, can I watch you take it out? And sure enough, this one is bloody. So he held a mirror behind my head and I watched them unscrewing this. And here's the good news. No more loose screw. Okay. That same foot is here. I fast forward. I'm backing up now to Switzerland.
I'm just going to interject something about the loose screw, because
no, I don't think so.
It is kind of significant, because during that time, he had been losing oxygen for a whole week, and they didn't really realize it because he was kind of out in the boonies. And so the doctor, when I got there, I'd be praying, Lord, spare his life, you had promised to be with us, etc. And he said, well, even if he does recover after taking the tubes out, he may not have the faculties in his mind at all. So, of course, then I didn't know what to pray, because I said, I've been praying to keep him alive. And then I said, well, I guess the only thing I can do really is to trust you, Lord, because I've seen so many miracles so far. And that's why that's a significant one, because turns out he did have his faculties afterwards when he had been losing oxygen for a whole week. So it's just one extra little miracle that we were thankful for.
Thanks, Linda. There's so many miracles, that's why it's going to be a book. So we have to move on to middle of the book, beyond the middle right now. This is my right foot. Here's my right wrist with the metal in it still. Again, another recalcitrant screw began to push itself out. Unfortunately, going the wrong way. Went to Chicago, they took that out. And I'm lighter. I tell people, you want to lose weight? Just get rid of the metal. And this is my right wrist. This is now my left. Notice how crooked it is. This x-ray was taken when I arrived in Switzerland. That's the way they put the cast on my wrist in Zimbabwe. So before they then pulled the bones apart, this is the way my wrist looked 25 days later, when I arrived in Switzerland, and then they had to break it apart to reconstruct. And you can see they're pretty straight now, right? Okay, so they worked on that, and of course I'm left-handed, so my left wrist took most of the impact, so they had to put an external fixator on it. That's what it looks like, going straight into the bone. And it was a long journey, folks. It was very painful. This is Dr. Thomas Rudy, the top orthopedic surgeon at the time, and I just thank God for his grace. Now, pain, I'd never understood pain. I'd never been as compassionate as I should have been, but the Lord was gracious. He taught me incredible lessons on pain. And I really mean, seriously, folks, pain so bad that there were 2 occasions when I actually wished I had not survived. Pain that drives you nuts. I understand pain a little bit, but I'm so thankful that there were people praying for me. Okay, remember that. If you are in pain, if you're having a hard time, remember, people are praying for you. And one more thing. One day I'm going to share 1 or 2 sermons. The people in the Bible, there were at least 2 or 3 people in the Bible who didn't want to live anymore. And you can read it about Jonah, about Elijah. But guess what? While they were wishing to die, they were talking to God. You get it? Keep in contact with God when you are in the greatest pain. And here it is. People sent us cards from all over. One of the medical superintendent said, this looked like a card shop. There were cards all around. People couldn't visit us because we were in Switzerland. So please, if you have a chance, I want to urge you. I found the value of people coming to visit through the cards. In fact, a couple of them I want to share here. Precious cards. We'll just read you one sentence here. We rejoice that your good health habits have given you the physical strength to endure, most important, and that God has kept you for his work. It's only God's grace, and I thank God for that. That's from some of our colleagues at Southern, where we worked before we went to Zimbabwe. This is a longer one. Ron and Linda, don't worry overly much about how well the surgeons will patch up your body. The Lord will give you a new one day soon. Amen. Just don't let anything spoil your heart. It belongs to him. We love you both and pray the best for you always. John Keyes, one of our fellow faculty members, also a missionary to Asia. And I thank God for that. It took time for me to get back on my feet. You'll notice I got a cast on my right leg here. They had to build a special cast so that my heel could be suspended. It's not easy to be able to walk with a suspended heel, and both wrists were broken. So if you know, when you have crutches, you're supposed to put the weight on your wrists. Well, they couldn't do that. So they had tall crutches, and I was going around hanging off these crutches under my armpits. And when I'd walk around, nurses would stop me in other places. When I'd come to the States, you've got crutches that are too tall. It's not healthy for you. And I'd say, got no choice. Both wrists were broken. And so it was an interesting experience, to say the least. But God was so gracious. But you know what's happened? I was going through all of this. And I thank God for Linda, who was there, urging me unsuccessfully to start moving. I was in so much pain, I just lay in bed day after day. Pain, begging the doctor for painkillers. And one time they gave it to me early, one time they refused. And that day I will never forget.
And in the meantime, I'm praying, help him to get up and exercise, because they're not even going to let him go until, he can move, he can shave, do something. He couldn't do anything, really.
I couldn't
He couldn't
shave.
push the help button.
That's right. She was there when I needed help. I said, press the button, because my wrist wouldn't work. So anyway, she sat there, and I was shaking in pain. Never forgot that. I just kept shaking. I couldn't do anything. So she began to sing, shackled by a heavy burden. You know the song, the chorus? He touched me, oh, he touched me. And I tried to sing with her, and I couldn't at first. He touched me, and I tried, and by the end of the first stanza, I could begin to sing a little bit. Here's what's weird that happened. I still don't understand it to this day. By the time the second stanza was over, guess what, folks? 0 pain. Another miracle. It's like, this is amazing. Just incredible the way that God blessed. But as I lay in bed, there was another medical doctor, a new medical doctor. It was a training hospital. He came along, and he said, Ron, you need to stop lying there. You need to start exercising. And Linda smiled broadly.
And that's because I'd been praying, and then the very next day I said, Lord, if Ron doesn't start exercising, I'm going to the doctor.
The doctor
and
came
I
before.
didn't even have to go to him. He, on his own, came and said the very same things that I'd been telling him all along. But
it takes a man to tell a man. So the Lord worked before she even went to the doctor. He came and he said, you got to start moving. So I began to move my fingers, move my arms. I began to exercise in bed. And the other thing that motivated me, besides the doctor's orders, I suddenly realized I had been invited to present a paper, and I'd written a proposal, and they said, you can come and do it, to make a presentation in Jerusalem. I'm talking about Jerusalem as in, yes, in Israel. And I thought, the Jerusalem Bible Conference, International Bible Conference, is going to be in 4 weeks' time. What am I doing lying in bed here? I got to get up. I couldn't move. Okay. And I said, I better start exercising. And as I focused on Jerusalem, I began to move my fingers, my arms, my toes. I began to move until one day I actually exercised 10 hours in bed. Just trying to move something because I wanted to get to Jerusalem, where I could participate with other scholars. And so I did. The Lord opened the door. I was healthy and strong enough, and I went to Jerusalem. Now you'll notice I'm in Jerusalem at the traditional tomb of the prophet Samuel. I have crutches. I have a cast on my leg. I have a back brace. I'm being held together by mechanical means, but guess what? I was in Jerusalem. And you know the spiritual lesson. You know that, right? It doesn't matter how you will eventually end up, scarred, whatever, but make sure, brothers and sisters, friends, that you and I end up in the New Jerusalem. Keep focused. Keep exercising your spiritual muscle. No matter, even if you end up there being held together, you'll be in the Jerusalem, the New Jerusalem.
Another lesson I learned, because I'm like, no way, going to Jerusalem, you can't even shave. On the other hand, I'd been praying. Lord, I said, you know what? If this is the thing that gets him going and gets him back to, gives him motivation for all this, I had to let it go again to God, which is kind of a hard thing when you're sort of want to be a little controlling of some of the things that happen.
Okay, and this is a picture of me coming out of the famous, well-known garden tomb, because it happened around Easter. You're wondering why I'm sharing the story today? By the time I come back from South Africa, it would have been, I'm back here, I'll be back in church. I'm glad to see Pastor Jack Sequeira. He's going to be preaching on April 6th, and this accident happened April 5. And it happened, this is around Easter, so when I was in Jerusalem, I went to the garden tomb, remembering Easter. And in a sense, God had brought me back from the dead, because I'd been, the oxygen level, 18% is the level of a corpse, and I thank God for his miracles in my life. My right leg, when they took the cast off, here's my right leg, notice it, notice how skinny it was. This is the one they had the cast on so tight that the doctor severed the nerve. And they said, Ron, you may never get foot movement back again. You may have what's called drop foot for the rest of your life. You know what I'm talking about? 3 weeks after they took the cast off, the foot started moving. Another miracle. And I'm so thankful. God has been so good. But I had something to do. God is gracious to us, but we don't just sit there. And I wanted to get fit again, but I couldn't run. I couldn't walk. I could barely limp along. I said, how do I get fit again? So I suggested to some of the friends, students, go with me on a trip. We'll go and promote abstinence as the best way to avoid AIDS. Abstinence from drugs, abstinence from sex outside of marriage. And we did 2 Stop the AIDS cycle trips. This is a trip where I'm sitting here with my crew, and these are the students and other kids, Adventist kids. We cycled 270 miles in 2.5 days from Bulawayo to the famous Victoria Falls. And they stopped on the way, these kids, and they did plays, and they handed out literature to the folk in the towns, promoting abstinence as the best way to avoid AIDS. And in the meantime, guess what? I was getting healthier and stronger, and there's no, cyclists, there's no pressure on the heel. And because my heel had been crushed, I was being able to get exercise. 2 years after the accident, I went back to Cape Town, where I'm going tomorrow, flying out, Lord willing, and going to Cape Town. And Linda joined a crew of 2 guys, and we did a fundraiser through another bike ride. Keep that in mind. The word is fundraiser. Keep that in mind as we get to the end here. We did a fundraiser 2 years to the day after the accident, and raised funds for the school I had been a student at, and rode through the mountains, 400 kilometers, 240 miles in 24 hours, raising funds for that school. The Lord has blessed, been able to get me back to health. A couple more pictures, I'm able to run again. And this race I ran was 2003, 10 years ago, but guess with whom? Anybody recognize the man on my left? That's correct. 30 years ago, the man on my left was the pastor of this very church. Dwight Nelson, the pastor of Pioneer, he had a major birthday in his life, and he's planned to run a marathon. So we went to the Chicago Marathon together, and we ran that 2003. The Lord has helped to bring me back with a crushed heel, sprained left foot, multiple injuries, almost at death's door itself, and God has blessed me. I know people always say, where do you find the time? Marathon training takes a lot of time. Not if you can learn how to multitask. If you look carefully, I am right now, it's a little hard with all the bright lights. Those lights are too bright, you cannot see. But I'm right now actually sitting on a bicycle, inside, indoors. And if you could turn down the bright ones, I'm not sure if you could, those ones there for a moment, you may be able to see better. This is indoors, on a bicycle, thanks. And I'm cycling right now indoors and typing a book, getting my exercise and working at the same time. All right, this was my gym in Michigan, and you'll see there's a table over here, and there's an ironing board over there, and there's a printer over here, and a refrigerator over here, and a phone there, and I had an entire workstation around my bicycle. And I was able to type a book, actually, and work on things, typing books, studying, and, gentlemen, folding laundry, so that it kept things going in the house. So I used to do that on the bike. and multitasking, because it takes a lot of time to train for a marathon, and there's a simple way to multitask. But of course, I do promote and also go out and do exercise outside. But the Lord is blessed. 7 years after the accident, I went back to South Africa, and I participated in the Comrades Marathon. My own father was there, passed away now. He took this picture. The reason I'm sharing all of this, obviously, because of God's grace. God, in fact, nowadays, Linda complains. She says, your memory's better than mine. And but I should have been, the multiple miracles, I could have broken my neck and been quadriplegic.
He had just put the chainsaw down, actually, so he didn't have it with him on that.
Oh yeah, I
trip
forgot
up the
about.
tree.
I forgot the chainsaw was also there. Yes, thanks for reminding me. I could have hurt myself very severely. Quadriplegic, paraplegic, could have been dead, could have been brain dead, and there are so many miracles. That's why we call it a marathon of miracles. Now, what's interesting? Before we even interviewed at the Oregon conference for the possibility of coming here. In September, I came here, and I was visiting a good friend of mine, David Asherick, down south a little from us in Eugene. And as we were chatting, David said to me, hey, Ron, put in your calendar April 28th. Why? He said, I am going to run the Eugene, Oregon Marathon. So I put April 28th down. And just last Sabbath, as I was greeting people, Cindy Williams said to me, guess what? I'm registered for the April 28th Eugene Marathon. It's like, okay. I hadn't registered. And then the next day, as on Sunday, I went to the Shamrock Run. Martin had told me about it, and so I said, let's go run, Martin. We did. It's up in Portland, 9.3 miles. And as I was running, I was thinking, Eugene Marathon, people had been telling me about this. And as I was running, I was thinking, hey, maybe I should do something about it, especially since my motto is fitness for witness. Notice my motto is what? Fitness for witness. And so I was thinking about, I've been invited to do the marathon. Cindy and Tom is doing it. Tom, by the way, is going to carry the pack for Cindy with the food and the water during the marathon, 26.2 miles. And I was thinking as I was running, maybe we can do something special. Something really special, because I know there are a group of young people who are here. And they're coming up right now because they've been telling me, I've heard from Sandy, that there's a dream for next year. Our Pathfinders want to go to where? Anybody know? Oshkosh. So Pathfinders are coming up right now. And as I was running that day for the 15K, 9.3 mile one, I was thinking about the Pathfinders. And so I called Sandy when I came back. I first talked with my associate, Pastor Steve. We dialogued about it. And he said, that may work. Maybe we can do something for the Pathfinders. Long story short, Pathfinders' plan is to go to Oshkosh Camporee 2014. And I said, maybe I should go and do the Eugene Marathon. This is what it looks like. And it's on April 28, 2013. So this week, before we went up to Canada, guess what I did? I registered. Here's the response. Dear Ron Dupre, this is off the website. Thank you. You are now registered for the 2013 Eugene Marathon. So before I went up there, and so what we're going to try to do, we're going to see if we can get marathon pledges per mile for our kids. So the kids are going to contact their friends outside, their family, and they may come to you and ask if you're willing to say, I will sponsor our pastor, let's say $1 a mile. Now, if I only finish 1 mile, that'll be $1. If I finish 10 miles, that'll be 10 miles. And we, by the way, you can see that on the website. You'll know how many I finished by going to the Eugene Marathon. If I finish a complete marathon, you'll be able to help our Pathfinders with $26. We'll cut the 0.2 off. It's 26.2, that, but there's that discount, all right? See that? We'll cut the 0.2 off. It'll be $26. So we're going to encourage you. The Pathfinders are going to...
or they could round up.
Linda says you can round up. Yes, she lived in Korea where you bargain, We were there as student missionaries. We'll tell you that story one day. So what's going to happen is the Pathfinders, they will be raising funds for themselves. I will be raising funds for the general fund. Sandy and I have talked. My goal is personally to try to raise at least $1,000 in pledges. You can pledge it now. By the way, you don't have to give the money now, because guess what? I haven't done the marathon. Only when I finished, if I complete the 26.2, then you will. And so you can plan ahead. You can say, you know what? In 4 months' time, I will be able to do that. But you can pledge it now for the Pathfinders. They're going to raise the money so that they'll be able to assist in raising funds so that they can go to Oshkosh, where they will be a blessing. They're going to represent our church, and they will be blessed. And so we're thankful that the Pathfinders are going to participate in this fundraising so that they can go to Oshkosh. By the way, they actually have these slips of paper with them. And if you're interested, they're going to right now, raise a hand. You might want to look at what it is. They want to hand them out. Sandy said, look, if people are interested, just raise your hand. This is not a commitment. Just curious, what are they going to do? Raise your hand. They'll hand them out to you right now, give you so you can read about it, and then you can talk with them later on once you've had a chance to pray and see if the Lord wants you to use your stewardship this way. So grab a sheet of paper, and remember, this is April 28th is when it is, and so we have a few weeks between now and then. And you can see what it is, and you can get back to our Pathfinders to help to sponsor it. And as they do that, you've noticed our pianist has come to play for us that special song that Linda sang that was better even than anesthesia. Is called He Touched Me. How many of you are acquainted with that song? Raise your hands. That's a lot of us. And so today, as the Pathfinders finish handing that out, we're going to ask if you can sing that with us today as our final song. He touched me, just the first stanza, and then we will have a benediction when you will participate with us in praying a special prayer. Thank you, Pathfinders. God bless you as during the next few weeks you go ahead and encourage people to sign up with the pledges. Let's sing this together, Shackled by a Heavy Burden. You can remain seated for this as we sing. Shackled by a heavy burden, neath the load of guilt and shame, in the hand of Jesus touched me, and now I am no longer the same. You sang so beautiful, so blessed. For the kids, by the way, and those who are still young at heart, if you want to today a special something that nobody else is going to get, if you come through the door, I'm going to stand out there near the foyer, near the door. If you want to, I can give you stereo sound effects, special sound effects that you won't hear from anybody else, from my wrists. If you want to hear something really, really weird, come by. Still the effects from 15 years later. And yes, it is true. When I go through the airports, I do beep sometimes. But you know what? Every time I do beep, I walk out and they try my wrists or they put the wand by my foot. I was in Paris one day, beep, beep, take your shoe off, beep, beep, take your sock off, beep, beep. And my foot kept beeping. And I turned to the lady, I said, you see the scar? She said, oh, I'm so sorry. But every time I walk through an airport and I beep, I got another reason to praise our gracious God. We serve a wonderful God, don't we? I'm going to have you participate with me in reading what will be our benedictory prayer, because it's our last verse. If you want to write one more verse down, it comes from Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, the last part of verse 1, the first part of verse 2, and it comes from a paraphrased version, actually a loose, dynamic version. And some of you know it from the King James Version. It's a precious promise. So we're going to do this as our final prayer, and then you will be dismissed. Let's read this in a prayerful way, focusing on Jesus. Ready? And let us run with endurance the race that God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, on whom our faith depends from start to finish. Amen. May God bless you. keep your eyes on Jesus. He is the only one who can bring us to the end. Thank you.